In our last video discussion, we talked about James and his position in leadership, and we really delved in and looked at the way that God had used everything in James's past, all the way up into the point that he became that leader and pastor of the New Testament church, and how he used that. And today, Carl, I would really like to just focus on leadership itself. We provided for those of you doing the online study the points that Carl had made in some notes that he had taken as he was studying through the book of James, and I would like for him to share those just quickly with us at the beginning of this video again for those of you who are doing this study in a small group setting long after our online study is over. So Carl, would you mind to start us off by just sharing with us the points that you came up with that God impressed on you as you were looking at the life of James?
Sure. I thought about James, and as we've talked about previously, James made a big mistake in how he viewed his brother early on in his life. And so one of the keys that I think we all know, because we've served under leaders that either do it well or don't do it well, is good leaders admit their mistakes. We all make mistakes, and that's part of it. And because of that, they gain the respect and they gain followers because of that honesty. And that they're real people and they admit those mistakes. And James had to do that. James had to step up, and he did a 180 that really changed his life and everyone he impacted. Also, they don't forget the needs of the people they serve. I think they always serve in great humility. It's the humble that really make an impact. I think when pride gets in the way of leadership, the leadership wanes and it fails, and people fall away from that leader. We see that.
And God removes them sometimes.
Absolutely, yeah, through divine action, yeah. And then finally, great people, great leaders listen. They let their people be heard, and that's probably when I witness a good leader. You watch them sit back and listen. It's not an authoritative, dictative leadership, but they listen, they assess it, they bring it all together, and then based upon their knowledge, and in this case, the biblical knowledge, they make their statement. They direct people the way that they should go to live the right kind of life.
Okay. Number 2 was the one that really seemed to speak to me when I read through your notes as we were looking over them earlier. And I think that that being sensitive to the needs of people is so important. And I know that number 3, that listening, really ties in. But what do you think in today's world, how can leaders stay sensitive and really know, because there's that whole hierarchy, especially in the church, there's the whole hierarchy of leadership where you have your head pastor, and then sometimes you have associate pastors or a youth pastor, family pastors, all these pastors. And really it seems like sometimes the lower you go down the totem pole of ministry, the more in touch you are with the people that you serve. Sometimes your head pastor speaks on a Sunday morning, but it's those associate pastors who are working day to day. How, as a leader, maybe as a head pastor or somebody higher up in the visionary type of leading the church, how do those people stay connected to the people that they are ultimately serving? How can they rub shoulders with them day to day?
Yeah, I think the key, I like the way you said rub shoulders, because you really have to be among the masses, right? It can't be done just from the pulpit. It can't be done just from the senior pastor's office, where there's a lot of work to be done and a lot of leadership that has to happen there behind that door. But they have to be out interacting with their people, because they have to listen, as you said, and they have to just observe and see what works and what's impacting people, what is bringing people closer to Christ. And what isn't. And I think that's probably a big challenge of a lot of pastors in terms of leadership is, in the church, there are many decisions to be made about where do they put the energy and the time and the finances of the church. And if any one of those things isn't leading people to Christ, then I think a good pastor, a good leader is going to assess why they have that program.
Absolutely. That's a very good point. Looking at, and something just popped in my mind whenever you were talking about good leadership, how do you think that somebody who is leading in a secular sense can look at this example of James and the points that you have brought out and apply that to not leading people maybe in a ministry way, but just in general? Because we know that all of the truths in the Bible are good principles to follow in every aspect of your life. So how do you see someone taking this information as they've studied James and his life and looked at his leadership qualities and making it work for them in their situation, whether it be as the father of their household or a leader on a team at work? how do you think that they can incorporate these points that you brought out?
Well,
How about that? I'll spring one on you.
Yeah, well, if we stick to the key points, it's really just, keeping those as the basis of our decision making and how we take action, and making sure that we adjust for every situation we're in. Because it's different in the church than work, than home, than at the baseball diamond, whatever you might be doing with your family and your community. We have to look at it and say, okay, number one, am I living my life with the example of Christ as the focus? Because if we do that, we're always going to make the right decision. Now that's hard because we're distracted by our earthly ways and the tendencies and the pulls and the demands. But I really think if we're in a situation and we listen to what's going on, whether that's our children, our spouse, our teammates at work, we look at the goal. What are we trying to achieve for the good of mankind here? And we do that in our homes. We do that at work. We obviously do that in church and trying to bring people closer to Christ. We're going to try and provide the right direction that is biblical. Now, obviously, sometimes you have to be careful how you do that in the workplace, and you have to be careful how the two cross. But I think I've been given great example that you don't ever have to talk about the Bible or talk about Christ or talk about church to show someone Christ's love. And sometimes that's the key decision you have to make is, do I just listen? Do I just observe? Do I just set a great example? Because, sometimes pushing the Lord and pushing Christ at the wrong time can set people going the wrong direction. So really, we have to be sensitive to God's calling, right? If we're in a situation where we think we can provide leadership, we better be asking for the Holy Spirit to rain down on us in whatever we do.
That's true. Good points. And I agree with you when you said that if we're living in a Christ-like manner, because when you look at those points that you made, being able to admit our mistakes and really listening and letting people be heard, those are all things that, Christ, not that he had to admit mistakes for us, because he didn't have to do that, but those are all things that he would be encouraging us to do anyway. And so you're right in the fact that if we're living a Spirit-filled life and we're following the direction of the Holy Spirit as we live our life, then that godness and just his Spirit is going to not just affect how we lead in a ministry sense, but it's going to affect how we parent and how we lead, in the job and all of that. And so good leadership and the qualities that we came across here as we studied James are good for not just in the church, but out of the church as well.
And we have to listen in every situation. I was rebuked very well, although my 5-year-old didn't know it was a rebuke today. I was set in my ways, and I was corrected very well by something very simple he said to me about how I make him feel when I do something. So we have to listen in every situation, and God's there trying to lead us, down the right road.
And you're right, he speaks sometimes in manners and through people that we wouldn't necessarily expect for him to speak, but he uses anyone and everyone to get our attention.
And again, I think if we lead with humility, if we're always willing for correction, if it takes us in the right direction, that's one of the keys, right? Don't let pride get in the way.
Yeah. The other day, one of the things that was up on the response to Grace wall had to do with correction, and that God basically only corrects those that he loves and cherishes. So when you feel that nudge from him, to cherish it and be thankful. Absolutely. All right, well, thank you very much for being with us, and we hope that you are enjoying your study as you continue to look at the life of James.